Hello, ICS3U folks. We've got a second lesson on functions and procedures and a couple of programs that we're going to look at that you've already looked at that I'm going to sort of explain a little bit and talk about some concepts that surround functions and procedures. Uh, Specifically, the idea of global and local variables. So, um, global variables are declared and defined in the record part of the program and can be accessed by all subprograms. Static global variables don't need an object to be used. And I'll mention what that means in a moment. Um, but this idea of a global variable is all parts of the program can always access and get their values. And as you know, you'll continue in your computer science career, you'll see global variables are kind of frowned upon as a little bit dangerous, and for reasons you'll maybe see why soon. Um, Local variables, on the other hand, that is, hang on, student dot first name equals FIRD is not static. So when we have this idea of a record, remember we've made a student record, Husky record, or whatever record it might be. This is not static, where first name equals FIRD is static, and we'll see an example of that again shortly. So anytime you see this student dot whatever, or you know whatever the record name is, dot field, that's a record, and that's global non-static global variables in the program. Remember the record part. This is the warm-up that hopefully you've done shortly. The record stuff goes in here, right in here. Okay. Obviously, this one didn't have any records involved, and we'll come back to this example soon. Local variables, on the other hand, are declared and defined in a subprogram, so in a function or procedure. So in our warm-up, we saw this is a function called bsilly, and you've answered some questions about this in the warm-up, I believe. These A and B here is only known inside this function. That's the scope of those variables. If I were to try and print out here, try and print system.out print line A and B here, that would give me an error. No field name A was found in type warmup. Okay, that's because it's only known in that function. So, well, how would I get access to those all over the place? Well, I could if I wanted to. This is very, very poor programming style. I could make them, this would be global static variables. And this is actually pretty nasty because now when I do this, it'll actually work, but maybe not the way I intend. So I printed out A plus B. So, well, hang on, wasn't A and B 3 and 4, right? Because this was called as 3 and 4. Wasn't it 3 and 4? So shouldn't this be 7? No, because this A and B that I printed out here were the global variables A and B, as compared to the local variables, which were only known there. So be careful. This is a global variable, and in my main program, it accessed the global variables, which might not be what I intended to do at all. And it can be confusing. That's why we don't use global variables very much. So, okay, how is it that I didn't have, I didn't have a record? How come it wasn't like student.a printed out, or student.b? Well, that's because these were static global variables. When I put the word static in there, that means I don't have to have a record. So if I wanted to, I could have, and I'm going to comment this out, I could have had int a and int b as, you know, non-static record variables. But then in order to be able to access those, I would have had to make an object. I would have had to make a record. So for instance, I would have had to do something like this. Warm up day 70, student. I don't know why I'm calling it student. It makes it silly that it's a student. And remember, this is the format to make a record. And then I would do stuff like this, student.a equals 23 or whatever I want to make it. And then it would work maybe in the way I'm intending or maybe not. Oops. Now it's saying A is not static and not be accessed in this static context. Well, what do I have to do? I have to access that like a record. Okay, I'm kind of getting off topic here about functions and procedures, but this idea of records is an important thing too. So this is going to work now. There's the 34, and there's the 32 plus 2355 that I printed out right there. This A and B is kind of a global variable, but it's the record, right? This A and B is now a record where this would be a global static variable, which is kind of bad style. This is better style. This is bad style. And certainly all of it is confusing because we have these local variables A and B as well. Okay? So beware of global versus local variables. So local variables, back to the note, declared and defined in a subprogram and can't be accessed by other parts of the program. We saw that when we got the error message for A and B. In our example, num1 and num2 are variables that are local to main. So, oops, let's get rid of that. Back to the warm-up. So num1 and num2 are local to the main method. So here's the main method. There's where they were declared. So this means that, and I'm going to comment all this stuff out. If I were to try and print out num1 and num2 up here somewhere in my get digit, let's just go system.out.println num1, it's not going to know what I'm talking about. Bam. Broken. Okay, hang on. What was that all about? Oh, we're not allowed to call things A and B here because it was all A and B before. That wasn't the error I was looking. This was the error I was looking for. No field name num1 was found in warm-up 70. Say, well, Restall, what about right there? Well, main is a local variable as well, local to the main method. If I wanted to make it a global variable, it would have to be declared up here, okay? And that is a little bit confusing, but notice jamming all the stuff up here in as global variables is kind of bad style. It's better to pass things back and forth like we did here. They're variables that are local to main. A and B are integers local to the B silly function. So we already talked about that one. Right? A and B only exist in this function. OK input and int input are local to get digit. So again, in the get digit method, the get digit function, all of these variables are local only to here. If I tried to access OK input and int input anywhere else in the program, it would give me an error message because they're local to this method. And then at the end, it returns the integer input and back to the main program right there. It gets assigned num1 and num2 in the main program. Dandy. It says, okay, well, what about the global variables? Well, there weren't any global variables in the original program. I've been goofing around with it since. But where would they exist if there were? It's this in this spot here, right? This would be a record, and this would be static int are global variables like that. So that's where it would appear. That's answering that question there. Global variables, and I've mentioned this already, are seen as poor programming style. If they are needed, we usually use a record, and I talked about that. which is a non-static, right? If the absence of the word static means we're using a record, um, but we won't be too picky about this in ICS3U. For the most part, when you get your program working the way you like it, I won't be too picky about global versus local variables. Certainly, we're going to have exercises today to make sure you know the difference, but I'm not going to be that picky about global and local variables. But where would they go? Again, global variables in the same spot where we would define records, the record stuff, but we use the word static to have uh, static global variables. All right, I'm going to pick up the next part, which I want to talk about passing arrays to functions and procedures, and I'll pick that up in part 2 of this video.